Hello and welcome to the 24th edition of the Communications Room. Hello Mark, hello everyone out there in the world
Hi.
watching our today's session. Mark and I, we discussed in preparing for this 24th edition what might be a good topic, and we said actually nothing maybe is more recent or more important than communication these days. So we hear this from customers, we hear this from talking to people in communication teams recently, and it's also our feeling somehow that communication really can be of help in this complexity and this type of VUCA world that we experience now. And we would like to discuss a bit about what the future of communication could look like, particularly for communication teams who hold this role in companies and organizations. And would like to invite you to join the discussion afterwards and share your thoughts on this. But to start with, maybe Mark, the question to you: What's the main trend you perceive at the moment in communication? What's needed most now?
Yeah, maybe that's two things. What's the trend and what is needed? Yeah, so let
Yeah.
me start with a trend that I see and that I've been supporting from departments with already. That is that communications is shifting from. Let me start with the setup. From a functional or organizational setup to a content and topic driven setup and approach. And that means that can go so far that there eventually there are no functional silos anymore as we have been used to them for decades. Like this is the internal comms team, this is the external comms team, this is the Marcoms team. And I have been working with a team who really deleted all that and said we define topics derived from the corporate strategy, of course, and for those topics we have project leads who are empowered as project lead, and they then get together the skills that are available within the team, and then they get their project done. So, and that requires, of course, lots of things, but one that is quite often overseen, let me put it that way, and that is focus. Focus is very important for comms as well as for managers.
Yeah, I fully agree to this, and focus also comes into play actually when I thought about the trend that is happening in communication at the moment. I would formulate it in the way it's maybe getting away from overload and rather moving onwards to sense making, I would say. And this also has a lot to do with focus, because my impression is that even now after the pandemic, if we can frame it in that way, complexity has grown much more since that. And, so maybe a year ago we talked about one topic mainly. Now it's maybe 5 or 10 of these complex issues that particularly managers and leaders need to handle in parallel. So which starts from inflation, which was just in the news today again, goes on to the war topic we also covered in one of our communication rooms in the past. It covers the global supply chains that are under pressure. It covers still the skills shortage a lot of companies experience, and we could go on with this. I think this is probably for some companies a never-ending list. And I think what's needed at the moment, and that is part of this trend, is actually that communicators help with this sense making that has to happen, and to distill really the important aspects for the company. And that's a communicative exercise, I would say, that mostly happens in dialogue and also in listening, of course, to different people, different sources, different stakeholders, but then also to bring it to the point in the sense making, to come to actionable steps in the board or in leadership teams, and that's, I think, where a lot of communicative help is needed at the moment. And it's not rocket science, I would say, but communicative action in its original sense. Maybe moderate a session, bring different types of content to the table, and like you say, it's also part of this topic approach, I would say, to bring some depth into the discussion that is happening.
Yeah, it looks like for whatever reason, during the pandemic and all the other stuff, the guinea pig wheel has started moving faster and faster, and communicators are, as you said, already communicators are overloaded with tons of topics that they, for whatever reason, are requested to take care about or to take care of. And referring to what you said, I think communications can become a role model here in being able to really focus and condense topics and actions to take to the ones who are the most sense-making. And that has been an original task of communications, at least as you and I understand it. And it somehow got lost in things like we all do agile working, and we are starting again to run in the guinea pig wheel more heavily than ever. But that doesn't help. The truth is it helps the other way around. So first there is the company's strategy and society's challenges, and from that you derive a communication strategy with a very clear focus, and from that you can derive very clear topics. And what I like to use here is the picture of the playing field. So you have to define the picture of the playing field. You have to decide on the kind of sports you play on this playing field. And then you have a good reason to even reject requests from whoever, because they are out of the playing field for this time. Yeah? And we all know that if you really want to have an impact, you have to focus on just a few topics and stories. Because otherwise, if you're telling hundreds of stories, they all weaken each other, and then you have no impact at all. So it's good to recap this initial task of comms to create an impact, and then we can talk about with which tools and models we are trying to reach that. And I mentioned the agile model, and I put a little bit a critical aspect to it. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think with the agile model, it's probably like with all standard tools that are around. If you call it agile, if you call it Scrum or Holacracy even, or whatever. I think all these tools, they came from a specific context, and there these tools may work. So if you talk about agile or Scrum, this I think it's part of more of the software development movement and what was originated in this context. And I think it can work if you work on a concrete product that comes into play in several iterations, like is typically the case with a software product, then it can work. But I still think that a communications team and communications department has a variety of tasks actually to solve, and these are not only product development tasks. So I think we need to think beyond these type of standard solutions that we have been around for quite a while. It's a bit similar with the newsroom, I would say. I mean, that's an adapted model from journalism, actually. And of course, there are some journalistic tasks in a communication team, but again, it's not all of this is not all communication work is journalistic work, so I would say it can cover maybe parts, but not this. And both, I would say, if you take a look at the agile model and the newsroom concept, they both do not necessarily have this sense making in their core. And particularly from the agile model, I made the experience that it's a continuous, also I would say, machine to create additional tasks and maybe to lose some focus, even like you said. And looking into the future, I think what's needed is probably could be something more like the opposite. Really having a communicator more as a facilitator for the sense making and for all stakeholders. It can start with management, but it's also true for employees and also for customers, because they face exactly the same challenges, at least if we look at the B2B environment, I would say.
Yeah, very true. And something that is really interesting for me, or looking back, looks a bit strange, is that around 2010, many newsrooms came up in communications departments at a time where we already knew or could know that it's not the old sender-receiver model anymore that will work, because news is send something to a receiver. That's the model of news. But that we will have to have a model of dialogue and interaction. And this came together with the internet. So on one hand, everybody's talking about interaction and dialogue, and on the other hand, newsrooms were introduced, which is a kind of a conflict here. And I mean, today, the hype of the newsroom is over, I would say. And then the question is, what comes next? And what comes next has to do with getting in touch, getting in dialogue with the stakeholders that you have defined, of course, from the internal world to the external world to the society world, and be able to facilitate or even be a catalyst for a sense-making process. Yeah. So I'm convinced that it's not only the communicator may not only be facilitator, but even catalyst for such a sense-making dialogue. And this is another great support, not only support, but enablement function of comms for the future, being the catalyst to get management in dialogue with stakeholder groups that are defined or have been defined as relevant. Yeah, so this is why you, Hartmut, and I have been discussing such a lot, and then came up with the communications room model, because the communications room eventually is such a model to come eventually to a kind of sense-making dialogue together with stakeholders on eye-to-eye level in order to find new solutions for whatever together. And the question of cooperation is today again as the question of dialogue or not is not a question anymore, and the question of cooperation is not a question anymore as well. So each and every company is talking about we have to cooperate with our suppliers, with our customers, and then you have even different words for that. And how can you get that done if not with communication?
Yeah, I fully support this view. Yeah? I would say that we maybe even need a more communicative communicator in the future in its original sense. One that is really a catalyst that takes a look at what communication really means for the organization. And actually, when working on this book here last year, Kommunikation neu gedacht, we had, of course, partly communicators in mind, but we looked at alternative communication models also primarily, and how these can be brought to life actually in today's situation. And there are many models that go beyond the sender receiver model, which in the end, I think it relates back to the 20s when telephony was still around and invented, when the sender receiver model, of course, played an important role. But nowadays I think we need to aim for communication that always also has the sense making in mind, and also creates something new, maybe a new perspective on a topic that is around, or a specific company perspective or leadership perspective on any of these challenges that we happen. And I think that's also what is needed more from, and expected more from society, from companies, when we look also at this perspective, because everyone is struggling with these challenges at the moment, and people inside, and management, and the employees, but also customers, and also the whole world around. And I think that's also why, so if we zoom out a bit and take a look at the whole perspective, why it's getting more important also to look at how the society reacts, and what role then also the company plays in society overall. And there, I think the big word, again, Mark, we covered it in previous talks, is trust, I would say. Where the trust numbers are more deteriorating, I think, and trust is at the low wherever we look, and companies still have some chance for trust, because there's a kind of closeness to the employees, and employees relate to the companies, whether they are in the office or not, or in a home office. But this connection is still there. And this, I think, is another important domain of communicators, and where communication can make a huge impact by having this trust in focus, and the need for trust that is needed in general. And it has exactly to do with this interaction with the stakeholder, and the multitude of stakeholders that every company has to deal with.
And it becomes more and more valuable if you look at it. So I think you referred to those surveys that have been coming out recently, where, interestingly enough, the most trust that is being put on someone or institutions is being put on companies today. That was very surprising for me. On the other hand, this is not only a chance, but then a very big responsibility as well. Then you have to deliver on that trust that you've been given from the public, and this is something that, again, that comms alone cannot do, because this is first of all, this is a question of management. All those sayings that we have, walk the talk and so on, are becoming more important than ever, because society does not forgive as easily as it may have done in the past. Therefore, it needs a very close cooperation of comms and management to come to, as you said, to that sense making, to keep that sense making, in order to keep an image of being a trustworthy institution or organization. And then this is really a very, very valuable coin, so to say, that you have in dealing with your stakeholders. Maybe the most important one today.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, and I think the really encouraging thing is that if you look beyond this trend of digital communication and so on that has been around for a while, is that communicators in the original sense really have all the tools, I would say, that are needed to do so, and to play this role, to be the catalyst for the organization. And I just remembered a bit back when writing this book, we had this integral model of Ken Wilber in mind. And he separates the world in 4 quadrants, but the important part here, I think, is to distinguish between the visible and invisible parts of an organization. And a lot of, I think, of the complexity now lies in the invisible part, which is not reflected in any numbers or figures or the spreadsheets delivered by business administration.
Yeah.
But here we covered more the domains of mindset and culture. And here, I think, as communicators, maybe there was a trend some years ago when everyone talked about storytelling. But I would say that also this type of storytelling, but not in a sense just telling a story, but also listening to stories and providing the room for stories to become transparent, and also to understand stories in something that we can proceed and prolong into the future. So this can really be the bridge or part of the bridge for the sense-making role and the catalyst role to also have this in mind. And just remember you, Mark, referencing also Harari on this. So there's been a lot around also in that in the end organizations are built from stories, I would say.
Yeah, that's if there's one truth in the books of Harari, then it is humankind is built on telling stories to each other. And the entities are being built by telling stories that are convincing for all those within the entity. And that's something that maybe has not yet been understood by everyone, but is again more important than ever, because if people are working in their home office, one thing is missing. We have been talking about it in earlier communications room talks. That's the social glue, which so to say comes by itself if you are together in the coffee room or whatever, having a little chat, and those little chats are missing or have been missing now for years. So it's even more important to be able to come to sense-making stories as at least the one sense-making story within the company. And part of it is, and you've been talking about culture, and one part of culture is, okay, our common story, our common convincing story, our common motivating story, our common sense-making story. And this is what especially young people expect from companies, that they provide something that is sense-making for them. The other thing of culture, of course, is how do we cooperate with each other, and what are our principal values, what are our principal behaviors, and one of them is trust, as you already said. Interestingly enough, we see those discussions today that people should come back to the office, to the physical office, culminating in Elon Musk's communication saying who does not want to be 40 hours in our office. He does not work for us. Very interesting from such a visionary pioneer, telling stories from the early 20th century. But it's not only him. And I had a little chat just a few days ago with someone from a company. who told me about a survey he has read. So that was how productive are people in the home office, and what does that mean? So the survey was the result of the survey was 80% of the employees said that they are, of course, to their own estimation, more productive than in the office for most of the time, because they can focus more, things like that. 70% of the managers said for the same of themselves, so they are more productive in the home office. Interestingly enough, most of the managers mistrusted the employees to be more productive in the home office. So they accepted it for themselves, but not for the employees. So there's still, and that's the point that I wanted to make here, there's still a lot of mistrust, especially in big companies. And as long as this mistrust is there, communication, not only by communications department, but communication as a tool or a lever cannot be as impactful and as successful as it could be if trust would be the guiding principle.
Definitely. This brings me just to another thought, because we were elaborating a bit on these alternative communication models, and there's actually one model around it, comes from systems theory. It's called CCO, communication as constitutive of organization. And these researchers actually say that organizations only exist from communication, and so communication is actually then the main mechanism to build trust, if you understand it in this dialogical way, I would say. And if you also see listening as part of communication, for example, and this open exchange, we call it the exchange on equal terms, actually that's also important, so that everyone has a saying, that there are mechanisms in play, and that there's a communication system, I would say, also in play, that allows this open exchange, and it can be so a system. I also have always separate layers actually in mind for such a system, which can be the open exchange for everyone, with employees, with customers, for example, in a communication room, like we talked about and presented already. Or it could also be more these one-on-one formats, for example, in a coaching or peer coaching process with managers, with employees, whoever has the need for that, and then also in different iterations. And that's maybe something I think which is helpful from the agile world to think in these different iterations, and also different lengths actually of iteration, so that there's maybe an annual routine, that you have a quarterly routine, a weekly routine, a daily routine, and this I think gives an organization a kind of stability from a communication perspective, to have all this in place. And maybe the core story does not change in days, or not every day or every week, but maybe on an annual or quarterly basis it makes sense to reflect on this and develop it further, and then continue to tell it and to listen and to see what the resonance is. Resonance is another term we have in our model with the stakeholders, but then also have a daily exchange, at least settled in the team, which I think is also still important to have it, particularly when people are working in the home office, and this immediately gives stability and also a communication point people can rely on, which is also trust building, I would say.
And contributes to building social glue even in the virtual world. Which can work to a certain point, and still I am convinced, and I tell it to each and every stakeholder and customer I see, if you really want to work together in a good cooperative open way, you at least have to have the lunch or dinner all together once a year. And then you don't talk about strategy, you just have fun. That's the minimum request, to have and bring a team together, and that teams are built on communications only. I couldn't agree more. And that's the thesis of Harari again. If you think about whatever company, what does it consist of? It consists of a common story that is being told, because everything else is not the company. Very interesting. Yeah,
that's right. And I think it's almost a good conclusion to our talk today.
Yeah.
There's no company, no business without communication. Or we could say business is only communication. And I started the talk, so I leave the final words to you, Mark. The final conclusion.
Yeah. If you have come that far in your thinking, that you understand that there's no business without communication, at least for me, this is so inspiring and motivating that I'm convinced that I will continue to put all my effort and power in improving communications in companies, for sure. And I hope that many others can get at least a glimpse of that inspiration and motivation that I feel, and I know that you have. And this way, we want to thank all those who watched this communications room talk. And again, we are thankful for contributions and critical arguments, whatever, on our way of thinking. And besides that, I'm looking forward to our next communications room talk together.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. Now I even feel more motivated. And thanks for everyone joining the talk today. And please join the discussion here on LinkedIn, YouTube. All the channels are open. And we're looking forward to host then the 25th edition of the Communications Room soon. So, thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.